Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robert Egnell, Vice-Chancellor of the Swedish Defence University.
Good afternoon from Stockholm and a very warm welcome to a panel on the role of regional organizations in promoting the Women, Peace and Security agenda, as well as to include civil society organizations in the key processes that affect them. Despite decades of activism, of Security Council resolutions, of political footwork, and also hard lessons from the field of conflict resolution and peace building, women around the world are still excluded from the peace processes that affect them. From research, we also know that this is not just a women's issue, but rather an issue of the quality of the peace processes themselves and their sustainability. In our attempts to effect change, we have often talked in the past about the global Women, Peace and Security agenda. We've also increasingly talked about the important work of local civil society groups, women's activists and peace builders. This session will provide a somewhat different angle by highlighting the role of regional organizations in implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda. More specifically, we will explore the added value and potential challenges of regional organizations. One specific area to explore is the role of regional organizations in enabling and widening the scope for engagement with civil society and women peace builders within and across regions. Another area I hope we can explore is how regional organizations can respond to threats against women peace builders and human rights defenders. We certainly also hope that we can provide a better understanding not just of the policies and theories underlying this agenda, but even more importantly, what we can refer to as the practice of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. What are the concrete activities and steps taken to promote women's inclusion, empowerment and protection? Since we have a number of key actors with us on this panel, we are also likely to hear what concrete steps and actions we can see from them and their organizations on the ground in the next year. And for this purpose, I'm absolutely delighted to present a superstar panel for this purpose. With us today, we have Linde, Minister for Foreign Affairs here in Sweden, but also this year the chairperson in office of the OSCE. Helga Maria Schmid, Secretary General of the OSCE, Rodina Ciulacco, founder and executive director of Women's Center for Development and Culture based in Albania. Siga Fatima Jagne, Commissioner for Social Affairs and Gender of Ecowas. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under-Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs at the United Nations. And finally, Sanam Anderlini, founder and CEO of ICAN. A very, very warm welcome to you all. Now, after a brief introductory film setting the stage for this panel, all of you in the panel will first have a chance to provide some brief introductory thoughts on this broader issue of the added value of regional organizations when it comes to the promotion of the WPS agenda, but from your specific perspectives, obviously. You will also get a brief individual question each. After this initial round of introductory remarks, we will let loose a bit and engage in the discussion around questions large and small from me, I hope also from you and from our audience. So an encouragement to all of you at home is to use the Q&A function and post questions to us. We will bring that into the discussion. Again, a warm welcome to you all.
Only 5% of signatories of peace agreements worldwide are women, even though the WPS agenda has advocated for female participation in peace processes for over 20 years. What opportunities do regional organisations offer to engage women peace builders, and what do local peace builders need for regional actors?
A very warm welcome, Minister. Anne, if I may.
Absolutely.
My first question is to you, since you're here in the studio. Now, you have assumed the chairpersonship of the OSCE at a time when there is certainly no shortage of challenges in the region and tensions. At the same time, you represent a feminist government with a feminist foreign policy, with quite a lot of experience in actively promoting these issues within the United Nations Security Council, but also on the ground in many countries where Sweden is active. I was hoping that beyond the broader question of how regional organizations can add value, that you right off the bat would question this, or tackle this question of the practice of the WPS agenda. What does it actually look like on the ground? What are the concrete measures and initiatives that you've taken and that you will perhaps also use in the coming year as chairperson and as foreign minister?
Well, thank you very much, Robert. And first, let me say how happy I am to be in this, as you say, superstar panel. And yes, we are definitely superstars, all of us in this panel. So I hope we can get some input into this important discussion on how to strengthen the women, peace and security agenda and what measures we and I have taken in the OSCE. Because regional organization plays a crucial role in the prevention and resolution of conflicts and peace building. And they are often the first to identify risks of potential conflicts and systematic human rights violations. This is something we share with civil society organization that could serve as a starting point for an even closer cooperation. Regional organizations are well situated to push the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And here we see the ability to connect field presence and decision making. In OSCE, we have the power to set the agenda for normative development as well as translating it into good practice. And that is what I have tried to do. But for this to happen, leadership is key. As chairperson of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security is a top priority. We know from our experience in the United Nations Security Council in 2017 to 18 that persistence yields results. So let me mention 3 things which we focus on during our OSCE chairpersonship. First, our aim is to mainstream the agenda throughout all our work in the OSCE, both in policy discussion, but maybe more importantly into practice in our efforts in the field. We need to talk about how conflicts affects women in all meetings, all decisions on peace and security. Through dedicated expertise, a gender perspective should be an integrated part of all mission work. And this is something I stressed during my visits in the OSCE field missions, like 2 weeks ago when I visited Central Asia and the OSCE missions in Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and so on. And I have asked all the head of missions to have a gender perspective in their reports back to me and the Secretary General. Secondly, we work actively to accelerate the women's participation in peace processes and conflict resolution. Women should be part of all delegations to peace talks as well as the implementation of peace agreements. A gender perspective needs to be integrated into the agenda of all the negotiation. And to enable participation of women more broadly, economic empowerment is key. We have taken a leading role in the Action Coalition in the economic justice and rights within the United Nations Women Initiative Generation Equality. Economic empowerment can mean access to land or resources, access to financial assets, to run political campaigns, and possibility to enter the labor market without restrictions. In view of the devastating effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, that it has had on the women's own situation, this is of immediate importance. Therefore, the Swedish chairpersonship has dedicated this year's OSCE Economic and Environmental Forum on the topic of women's economic empowerment. And thirdly, a safe environment for women peace builders and civil society organizations is key to peace and development. During my visits, and I have traveled extensively since I became chairperson in the OSCE region, I always want to meet with the civil society organization to get a broader view and understanding of the current state of play in a country. And sometimes it differs from what I hear from the presidents and the foreign ministers, but it helps us to take better decisions. And as OSCE chairperson in office, I would like to underline the need for regional organization to have internal capacity to implement the women, peace and security, both when it comes to leadership, expertise and outreach. I have also, I have to say, an excellent cooperation with our Secretary General, Helga Schmid, who is here on the panel today, and also the Special Representative on Gender, Mrs. Liliana Palhovici from Moldavia. And as a chairperson, I also have the support of the OSCE secretariats in the field mission who work with these issues daily. I've also established an advisory group of experts on women, peace and security, and they will provide additional ideas on how we can strengthen the agenda in the field missions. So finally, knowing the active work of the fellow colleagues in this panel, I think we have an opportunity to create standards of practice for regional organization that will enable us to push really hard for this work. The PPA has been a strong leader for women's participation in peace process, and Ecowas has exemplified the importance of regional ownership when it comes to furthering women's rights in women, peace and security. So I very much look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you so much. And I might say from a researcher's perspective, having studied the foreign ministry for many years, that it's quite interesting to see what an impact on the organization and the culture, this prolonged emphasis on these issues and the active work in the field that you do, what kind of impact it has internally of the organization. So on that note, I would like to turn to Helga, and please all of you, forgive me for continuing down this informal track. Implementing the WPS agenda, it's obviously about what we do in the field and how we act as an organization. But one might also assume at least that what we represent, the culture within the organization, our identity, our procedures and processes, decision-making, etc., has an impact. So beyond this question of because it's obviously very interesting to hear from you, Helga, what your perspective of what the OSCE can add in terms of value of promoting WPS, but also then how can the OSCE transform internally its processes, its procedures, perhaps its representation and what have you, in order to be an actor better prepared to implement this agenda in the field?
No, thanks very much. And also I'm delighted to be in that panel. But before I maybe talk a bit more about what the OSCE, the world's biggest regional security organization, is doing, let me say how happy I am with the Swedish leadership, and particularly also with the very strong commitment from Minister Linde, because indeed we need leadership for these issues. And as you rightly say, I think we have to make sure that we walk the talk. And that's why in the OSCE, I mean, one of the most important things we're doing, we're supporting the development of national action plans. They are absolutely critical when it comes to women, peace and security. But how do we actually promote women's leadership throughout the organization? And here I would mention a couple of things that are absolutely crucial. It's a bit also my experience from working in the European External Action Service before. Mentoring is very important, that's crucial. Supporting women's networks. I'm a strong believer in women's networks, particularly when it comes to mediation. And then capacity development, that's another very important area. We have a board, a management staff college in Dushanbe, and this is actually a good example because they offer specialized training for female border guards, and they systematically include the gender perspectives in all other courses. Also, gender is mainstreamed in the work plans of all our formal bodies, particularly also in the political military area. For example, the Forum for Security Cooperation and the Security Committee. Maybe one or two examples also from the field. And Linde mentioned the field missions. For example, in Ukraine, our biggest monitoring mission. Here, our monitors make sure that the reporting they do reflects the views of both men and women. So in the conflict affected populations, also the voices of the women are heard. This is absolutely important. At the same time, I have to be honest, ensuring a balance among our monitors remains a great challenge. We are not in a position yet to have mixed patrols, for example, at least not all the time. So, so we know from our own efforts how challenging that is, but also how important that is. But then again, I think we all know that a gender balanced and gender sensitive organizations deliver better results. So it's not only an abstract objective, I think it's also for the sake of increasing effectiveness. And here we have an ambitious gender parity strategy that goes back to 2019. The ambition is to reach gender parity by 2026. We look at different pillars. First, to make sure that we have an inclusive work environment. That's very important. Talent acquisition is important, but also, again, the need for leadership. Leadership is critical. I am proud to say that progress was made, especially in the area of senior management, where we went up from 25% in late 2018 to 40% 2 years later. And also we have now for the first time reached parity at the level of the directors and heads of the institutions. 2 out of 4 are women, and I'm of course privileged to be the first female Secretary General. But it's not enough. I think what more, and let me finish by that, what more needs to be done. I think we are trying to attract more women also to the OSCE, particularly in the area of the political military area. And here what we do is we offer recruitment webinars to help women also prepare for the applications and the interview processes. You can actually train for that. We also provide specific mentoring programs. We also make sure that gender training is available throughout to all staff. And we also, and that's very important, we need to make sure that OSCE conferences and events are gender mainstreamed, and that, for example, the all-male panels that existed not so long ago are really a thing of the past. Informal groups are important. There's, for example, an informal group of women in the first dimension and related to activities in the political military sphere. And that is an informal way also of promoting things. And maybe last point, and I believe this is very important, absolutely zero tolerance when it comes to sexual harassment. I take this extremely seriously. I'm first holding managers and supervisors accountable for an inclusive and also for a gender-sensitive management culture. But also what we are trying to do is to make sure that all staff members are sensitized to the issue and that our internal compliance measures are actually improved through mandatory training. So again, this all sounds very straightforward. In the end, it takes a lot of leadership, but I think it's important. Just to finish, I think internal policies and external activities, programs are really complementary. And for the OSCE, our ambition really is to lead by good example.
Thank you so much. And I might say it's an honor to be the token man on this panel rather than the opposite way around, which is usually the case. But at the same time, it's a little typical that it's this particular topic where I'm in minority. I'll now turn to Rudina. You are based in Albania, and in this panel you're representing the women on the ground doing hard work every day to try and make a difference. Now, it would be fascinating to hear from your perspective, what kind of work do you do? What does your everyday look like? And to what extent do regional and global organizations even feature in your reality? Do they make a difference? From your perspective, will the addition of regional organization or the presence of regional organizations be a welcome addition, or is it just another layer of bureaucracy and forms to fill out in a rather crowded space already? What do you see as the added benefits, but also perhaps the challenges of regional organizations for you on the ground?
Thank you, Robert. I would like to extend sincere gratitude to all the forum's organizer, panelists, and distinguished participants, feeling privileged to be part as one of the speakers of this high estimated panel. As you mentioned, I am the director and founder of Women's Center for Development and Culture, Civic Society in Albania, organization which is focused on women and youth empowerment, building resilience community, countering and preventing violent extremism, and promoting women WPS agenda in Albania context. Through years, our organization has implemented several projects to boost partnership among different local stakeholders in grassroots levels. Recently, some of the projects are research study examining gender component of radicalization on women, examining gender component of radicalization and violent extremism in Albania. In Albania, she built peace campaign by spreading the culture of she built peace campaign by spreading the culture of recognition the role of women activists as peace builders in collaboration with ICAN. Another project promoting WPS agenda in 11 municipalities by the project An Integration Approach to Promote Women and Youth as Peace Builders, founded by IPF. Regional organizations have been a great support for SEO in Albania throughout the years at different levels, both financial aid and expertise support. But however, these supports, being project-based, sometimes has a risk for the continuity of the actions and consequently creates a gap in the sustainable impact of the initiatives implemented at local level. Related to the interaction with partner organizations in international and regional level, I would consider them welcome and valuable allies for purpose of capacity building, networking, and advocacy. As a good example, I would like to emphasize the great support from our partnership with ICAN, which increased our work dimension on the organizational capacities as well as broader opportunities to work in our field of focus. Furthermore, continual training offered by OSCE for youth and women community leaders, including of civic organization from local level, has been an important factor for new approaches to security issues in building resilience community and gains good practices on preventing and countering violent extremism. There are also specific regional organizations in the region of the Balkan, such as Western Balkans Fund or RICO, whose activities and funding opportunities are directly at sustaining reconciliation and peace building. I would like to emphasize that ongoing partnership with regional organizations, the recent approved strategies and their implementation with efficiency is our common challenges for the continuation of sustainable projects. Often a key factor that depends on the long-term cooperation we have with the regional partners and adaptation to changes in the priorities. What I would like to emphasize that the regional organization has been a great important factors in the Balkan, but especially for our organization at local level. Thank you. This is a brief summary related to our projects, related to WPS agenda.
Thank you so much, and it certainly is an impressive range of issues that you tackle at the local level. I'll now turn to Siga Fatima. A really important aspect of the Women, Peace and Security agenda as promoted in Security Council Resolution 1325 and subsequent resolutions is the protection of women from violence in general. Sexual and gender-based violence in conflict, more specifically also, but also the structural violence that hinders women to reach their full potential in many societies. I would be delighted if you could talk a little bit about how regional organizations can address these protection issues, and more specifically, if you have any specific examples from Ecowas and your own region.
Thank you very much. The Ecowas Commission, as a regional intergovernmental organization, is committed to gender rights and ending violence against women. This we have anchored on the revised statute of the Ecowas and protocols emanating from the revised statutes, including peacekeeping and security, and supplementary protocol on democracy and good governance. The Commission has also developed a number of policies and institutional frameworks for the implementation of UNSCR 1325, which include an ECOWAS gender policy, the Women, Peace and Security component of the ECOWAS conflict prevention framework, plan of action for the implementation of the Security Council 1325 and 1820, and the ECOWAS Parliament Gender Strategy. These are important regional plans which we use to do most of our work. The ECOWAS Commission, in its work, in advancing gender rights broadly, has also promoted the development of institutional structures, forums, and platforms for networking and advocacy, including the West African Network of Young Female Leaders, which was formed in 2009, ROAGELF, Network on Peace and Security for Women in the ECOWAS region, NOPSWECO, 2009, also a network of the ECOWAS female parliamentarians in 2010. Working Group on Women, Youth, Peace and Security in West Africa and the Sahel, which is coordinated by UNOWAS, and the ECOWAS Network on Women in Conflict Prevention and Mediation, FemWise West Africa, which we just formed in 2019. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are important sub-organizations that we have set up that do most of our work for us at the level of the member states. It is critical for us to address gender-based violence, and on this subject, we address it as human rights, developmental, and peace and security imperative. This requires intentionally addressing the social and cultural norms, regulating power relations between men and women, and approaches, especially on linked aspects of subordination. And on the part of the ECOWAS Commission, the approaches of the targeted advocacy and sensitization to higher national authorities, as well as direct technical and communication-related initiatives with both state and non-state components of society are prioritized. In other words, driving a whole of society approach is what we have at ECOWAS. Such an approach implies recognizing the need to engage men and harnessing all social institutions, including faith-based institutions, traditional systems, the private sector, etc. We also have the legislative, policy, and institutional imperatives, which are legal and normative policies and institutional spheres driving ECOWAS engagement with member states within the context of the whole of society approach, which includes ensuring constitutional guarantees of gender equality in all ECOWAS member states. We also work at the same time, very specific to, we have a community-based integrated approach, which is, I think, is very unique. We combat GBV through community-based, multi-pronged and sustained engagement with all stakeholders at the local community level, subnational entities at the national level, and strategies deployed must address underlying risks of violence and in situations of conflict or fragility, include not only an engendered approach, but a conflict-sensitive one as well. ECOWAS is mainly in the business of harnessing the collective wisdom of key stakeholders, including member states, civil society, and partners, forging consensus around priorities and necessary action, facilitating technical improvements, and ensuring collective accountability and peer review at both technical and political level. The strategies thus forged and implemented account for community participation, access to justice and health services for victims, mobilizing to ensure the prevention of gender-based violence, amongst other measures. These span the socio-ecological levels with an emphasis on empowering the individual, strengthening resilience at the level of relationships and the community, and strengthening protective factors, while limiting risk factors at the societal level. There are a litany of operational and tactical issues in the law enforcement and social welfare field that must be advanced towards ending GBV in both situations of conflict and fragility, as well as in societies not subject to conflict or fragility. In the case of the populations affected, prioritizing humanitarian principles and international law, as we have done and continue to do with ICRC and other partners, is critical. Ensuring that these are woven into the fabric of all humanitarian initiatives and in our responses within the peace and security sphere are non-negotiable. Outside of the context of the conflict and fragility, we are still having critical changes which are required in policing, social welfare, education, health, and required to address GBV, especially in addressing social attitudes, stigmatization, and in some areas, corruption in the handling of cases. A regional organization such as Ecowas is well positioned to drive the exploration of best practice and apply its convening power to ensure accountability with respect to outcomes. Some specific ECOWAS actions. The President of the Commission on 22nd June 2020 issued a strong statement titled ECOWAS Calls for Urgent Action to Address Sexual Gender-Based Violence and Protect the Rights of Women and Girls, unequivocally condemning sexual and gender-based violence, especially against children, and the apparent increase in case since the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially with lockdowns in 2020. He directed that the Commission convene a virtual meeting of the relevant national institutions in the member states, international partners, and non-state actors to agree on a joint regional action plan against gender-based violence with a special focus on child sexual abuse. My department, in fulfillment of the President's directive, has established a regional partners, CSOs, and NSA's working group on gender-based violence with organizations drawn from the ranks of development partners, international NGOs, civil society organizations, and other non-state actors, including the private sector. In 2020, the working group was engaged with support to research, advocacy, the provision of both financial and non-financial resources, and technical support to member states in combating SGBV, including in country direct interventions. We also had held technical and ministerial meetings in 2020 and established a member states network of focal points and focal institutions on combating GBV and ensure the mainstreaming of prevention and management of GBV in national development plans during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. Currently, there is an ongoing consultancy for the mapping of member states and partners, non-state actors' response to GBV in West Africa, pre-COVID-19, and the impact of COVID-19 and development of regional action plan against gender-based violence, which have special focus on child sexual abuse, which has actually, the figures are astounding. And recently, what we are also seeing is a rise in victims being killed after they're sexually abused. And this is something we are going to add to our work in the next few months, and we'll be going to nearly all the member states to discuss this issue of adoption of young girls and them being raped and killed. We find it very disturbing, and we want to protect the young girls and the young boys from this kind of carnage that is beginning to happen in the sub-region. And most of it, of course, linked to the fact that there are so many displaced populations due to violent extremism and due to banditry and other issues that we are all dealing with in the humanitarian unit of my department. I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Siga, Fatima. And I'd say a special thank you for those concrete measures that you have taken in the Ecowas region. I'd like to turn to Rosemary at the United Nations at this stage. The United Nations is in many ways the mothership of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, having organized the really important World Conferences of Women, passed all the Security Council resolutions. And your perspective on the role of regional organizations is therefore particularly interesting, sort of from a top-down perspective rather than a bottom-up that we heard from earlier. But also, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the internal contradictions that you are, in many ways, all of you facing representing international organizations. The fact that you are pushing for a very progressive agenda, focusing on women, peace and security, while at the same time having quite a lot of members who are not too keen on this agenda, and that might also in their work in the field sometimes also contradict this agenda in the way they are operating. How do you navigate this difficult field when you work in global or regional organizations? Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And I just want to say I too am really pleased to be with such outstanding and committed individuals today. As far as the relationship with regional organizations, when the UN was established 75 years ago, member states understood that the challenges the world faced were too complex for any one organization to address. So they embedded into the UN Charter, Chapter 8, a vision for global cooperation that was complemented by regional arrangements and regional institutions. Now, as this world has become more complex, obviously cooperation between the UN and regional organizations has increased, and this includes our work in women, peace, and security. And I must say that regional organizations are absolutely integral to the work that we do in this area, and we partner with them on many occasions. Let me just give you a few examples where I think regional organizations play a really critical role. First, they're essential in developing, monitoring, and ensuring accountability for women, peace, and security policy and programs. And give you an example of the African Union that's adopted a gender equality strategy, established a network of African women's leaders. Its Continental Results Framework that was established with UN support has enabled systematic monitoring of WPS, and it's led to Africa becoming the continent with the highest number of 1325 national action plans. The League of Arab States now, also in cooperation with the UN, is establishing an Arab women's mediation network to increase women's participation in peacemaking in the region. Second, regional organizations really play a very key role in providing pathways to elevate grassroots women. They work with civil society, including the Global Alliance of Regional Women Mediator Networks, and they can normalize regular dialogue with grassroots women. And third, I think that by establishing very strategic partnerships, regional organizations can help secure real scaled up support to WPS. Give you one example here, and this is the efforts of the UN, EU, and OSCE, all three working to increase women's participation in the Geneva international discussions. Now, in all of these efforts, regional organizations like the UN rely on the political will and the investment of our members to drive social change. You pointed out that not all of our members embrace WPS. And we have seen, without a doubt, a global backlash against the WPS agenda in recent years. We saw that previously agreed upon commitments to gender equality are being challenged, financial support for women's empowerment being diverted, civic space shrinking, including for women. Tackling these dynamics is no easy feat, I should say. So how do we pursue this? How do we pursue the Women, Peace and Security mandate despite the reticence of some? Well, first of all, we firmly believe we've got all the normative documents that we need. We have resolutions, we have statements. What we need is implementation. Implementation is key. We believe, first and foremost, that we must demonstrate the importance of women's leadership in public life, including in peace and security. We must lead by example. And Secretary General has appointed women to serve in 50% of senior positions at headquarters and in the field. And I was glad to hear Helga speaking about her efforts also at making sure that we are leading by example. We are now pursuing some innovative models for women's participation. We are sort of utilizing independent delegations to strengthen women's inclusion in peace processes. I met just last week with members of the Syrian Women's Advisory Board that we helped set up. They are advising the Special Envoy on Syria regarding women's concerns and perspectives of this decades-long conflict. And despite the fact that they come from different political perspectives, they're working together towards a peaceful future for their country. Now, I'm very pleased to note that some of these women who are part of the advisory board are now sitting at the table when the Syria Constitutional Committee meets in order to, again, pave a way forward for a more democratic Syria. Also, I should say that when we lead a peace process, we are clear to establish targets. We were pleased to have 30% women at the Syria Constitutional Committee and 22% women for the most recent Libya political dialogue. And finally, we're investing in these efforts. And since 2018, the Peacebuilding Fund has allocated 40% of its annual total investments for gender equality initiatives. And we thank everyone for their voluntary contributions in this area. Let me just stress overall that despite some reticence, WPS agenda has tremendous support at the UN. Since 2015, 5 of the top 10 Security Council meetings with the most speakers have been under the WPS umbrella. Now, as I mentioned before, our effectiveness in implementing the WPS agenda relies on the sustained political commitment and investment of its members. And to this end, I really want to thank you all for your continued vocal and practical support.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, and thank you also for highlighting the worrying backlash we've also seen globally around these issues. I'd say both at the international level, but also so many witnesses from the field about a shrinking humanitarian space and a shrinking space for women's organizations especially. I'll turn to Sanam. You represent civil society organizations, women's groups from all around the world. And so your perspective on the value added of regional organizations will be really interesting. But you're also one of my favorite thinkers on these issues. So I thought I would also turn slightly theoretical on you and ask you to perhaps talk a little bit about what it means and what the effects can be when we constantly talk about this acronym WPS, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. First of all, there's the question of other gender-related issues that might not be part of this agenda, or can it be? Do we risk missing those? But also the fact that not in this global agenda, these perspectives might not always address the very particular and context-specific issues of women in certain conflicts and emergencies, that this becomes a too general and global agenda that doesn't quite match the intersectionality required to be really locally relevant. Well, that was a long and difficult question for you, Sanam, but please, do your best at least.
Thank you very much. It's so nice to be in Stockholm this morning from my living room in Washington, and I really hope that one day we will actually all get back to seeing each other. And thank you for inviting me to this amazing panel. Every time I see Helga Schmid, I think she did the JCPOA, and the fact that we had such great women at that table, I think is a testament to why this agenda matters. It does make a difference to have women in the spaces of negotiation, whether it's internal conflicts or international conflicts. So it's really great to be here with you and with the Swedish Foreign Ministry, and of course with DPPA, which is my one home in the UN that I really feel at home with when I'm working with the UN. Just to put this in context, so one of the things that at ICAN we've tried to do is we have a sort of two-pronged approach to these issues. On the one hand, we're involved in the advocacy and trying to shift the paradigms and the policies and the practices of the international institutions and kind of the thought leadership needed around that. So when violent extremism is on the agenda, we're the ones who will look at it and bring in the gender perspective and explain in very practical terms what it looks like in Albania or in Nigeria or in Kenya or Pakistan. So we're bringing kind of the lens onto the issues. Similarly for COVID, it was really important to see what's happening and the differences. And one of the ways that we're able to do that so readily and with so much nuance and so much kind of contextual analysis is because we do have the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, which now has over 90 members, 90 independent women-led organizations that are members, all of them in conflict and fragile states, and all of them very specifically specialized in doing peace building and peace and security work. So they're not generic women's organizations. These are actually the ones that are doing a lot of the peace and security kind of at the sharp end of it, like Rodina's organization. And to be able to connect and network that and bring it into the global space is really, really important, because it also deals with these issues of saying, well, this agenda is Western. When we get the backlash, what is it? Oh, the agenda is Western. When you then hear from a Nigerian or from a Pakistani colleague or from an Afghan colleague who's working quite locally and relates to the agenda, that argument and that narrative is basically busted open because it's a myth. So the networking, the financing that we're able to do for our partners, et cetera, all of these things are really critical. And Robert, to your point, the regional organizations are essential because our partners want to have somebody who's closer to them. They don't want to constantly have to think, oh, I have to go to the UN, and where in the UN do I go? There's so many different issues. Whereas if in the OSCE context, they knew that they had basically the email or the phone to pick up and say, this is what's happening in the region. This is how we're dealing with it. Similarly for the AU, similarly for right now, we have a series of partners that are really interested in setting up a Southeast Asian women mediator network, because we have the Commonwealth, but we don't have anything that is specifically to the Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal. I mean, they have their own context issues that they look at. I'm Iranian by background. Where are Iranian women in the conversations around the region? Whether it's with Yemen or Saudi Arabia and et cetera. So we do need the regional organizations to kind of embed and own and take responsibility in a way. And the protection question will come to in a minute, because a lot of the work is around recognizing that we actually need these organizations. If we go back to Chapter 8 of the UN resolution, of the UN Charter, if member state regional organizations were needed 70 years ago, right now we need in-country civil society organizations, because the problems are so localized. To your question about WPS versus what else we would call it, it's 20 years, we have all this language, and you're all international actors. The negotiations that go into every single word of every single resolution. 20 years ago, we couldn't get the word gender, peace and security into Security Council. We couldn't even get the word civil society. If you look at 1325, it says women's peace initiatives, right? So it's an evolution of our thinking and the work and so forth. But what I would say is that essentially what women peace builders have always done, and this agenda comes from the ground, from women peace builders, they've always looked at it from the standpoint of everybody that they care about. All the women peace builders I work with men, they work with young men, they work with the elderly, they work with the communities with disability and the marginalized. including communities and people who are of intersectional gender identities and so forth. So it's always been there. It's really the human lens. It's like you put on the glasses and all of a sudden you see the diversity and pluralism of our societies that comes through this agenda. Having said that, it's not just our responsibility, right? It's not, this agenda is so overburdened. What I would say is that, in 2008, we brought the question of all sorts of people being victims of sexual violence, including men. We couldn't get the word men into a Security Council resolution, but we said civilians, right? We've been criticized about why do you only talk about women? We don't, we talk about everybody. My question is, why don't other agendas talk about us and talk about these issues of intersectionality and identity? So it really is a question of what are we doing, but what are others doing as well to make sure that together we're looking at inclusivity, plurality, and the voices of peace actors at peace tables, which I hope we can come to again in terms of what Rosemary was saying regarding Syrian women, and I really hope Afghan women and others can have independent delegations at their own peace talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sanam, for that very clear argument about the bridge building role that the regional organizations can play, that they are locally rooted but also have that bigger perspective. So we're going into round 2, and that means a more lively discussion and dynamic engagement between all of you as well. I'll lead it off with questions. I also have a few questions from all of you at home on my iPad, but also feel free to engage with each other. But keep it slightly short and snappy for this second round. My first question would be, you've all sort of touched upon networks. National, regional, global networks of women mediators, negotiators, etc. And that's great. We can never again hear the excuse that there are no women ready for these roles, because there's binders full of them, as they said in a US election a number of years ago. So my question then is rather, what can global or regional and local organizations do to make sure that these networks and all of these competencies are actually engaged and used in peace talks and negotiations? And specifically from the audience on a similar topic is, how can the OSCE support women parliamentarians, another group, another network of women, so to speak, for the same issues? Who would like to go first? Ann, you're welcome. Go ahead.
I take the screen immediately, because tomorrow I will meet a Swedish, the Women Mediators Network that we started in Sweden 3 years ago, when we were kind of the first one, and now it's spread all over. And it's very important that we involve the women in the mediators networks in activities and in meetings and in different levels and different contexts. For example, now we will use members of our mediation network for the upcoming seminar on the conflict circle. But I also think that we include the members of women's networks in wider decision on peace efforts. And I always, when I'm on a panel like this, I always like to bring up my many talks with Yemeniti women, because I work a lot with Yemen, and it really makes me sad that there are so many good, constructive, knowledgeable women from Yemen. That is not making me sad, but they are not used. They are not getting into the negotiation. They are an untapped potential that the government is not using. Every time I speak with the actors, like the Yemeni foreign minister or others, I say, you have this great potential. Why don't you use it? And that's I think you have to think about it, and you have to be conscious about it, and you have to use those women in the different sphere, and to connect between the local, regional, and central level. That's important. And finally, to bring on the young women. I said that we have a special representative on gender in OSCE, but we also have a special representative on youth and security. And last week we had special youth seminars and discussed it. And if we don't bring the young women into this, all of us who are getting older by the day, we cannot keep up this momentum. We need it to be a constant flow of new young women coming into the work that we have kind of paved the way for. So this is something I also think, to always try to bring some young women into the work we are doing.
Thank you so much. Helga, what about the parliamentarians in the OSCE region? How can we make sure that they are part of it? Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
Absolutely crucial. I mean, we have the Parliamentary Assembly, and whenever I travel, I was in Stockholm in February, I always meet with the parliamentarians, because the complementary angle they bring is crucial. To give you one example, I think 2 weeks ago, and Anne was participating there, the Afghan ambassador in Vienna, who happens to be a woman, organized a networking event with great participation from very impressive female parliamentarians from Kabul. And I think the point also I wanted to make here is, because women are very, very often engaged at the grassroots level. But then when it comes to the official processes, or not only the official peace process, but then also the decision making, the political life, they're absent. And I think this is also something where parliamentarians can help, but we all need to help, where we need to make sure that we connect the informal parts of mediation, peace building with the formal networks. And here also in the OSCE, we have developed a so-called toolkit to strengthen that. And the other point is again, the need to do everything we can, and we do it in the OSCE, to make sure there is no excuse to say, well, there are no women available. So also to offer training, particularly also in the male-dominated areas of the political and military spheres. But again, give what the one, because also, as you mentioned, networking, the one lesson I have learned in the past years is give women a voice, give them visibility, make sure that in every official meeting you raise them, you raise their needs, because they bring different perspectives to the table. And here I want to support something Sanam said. It's not about women for the sake of being women, it's about plurality, it's about inclusivity. It's just make sure that different perspectives women bring, particularly in peace processes, because they focus on transitional justice, more on socio-economic issues, education. This is also crucial to sustainable peace. So this is what it's all about.
Sanam, I saw you waving there, and perhaps you can also address a problem that I've noticed quite often, which is that women are often quite welcome when it comes to cleaning up the mess after the men, so to speak, being part of the peace process rather than the actual peace negotiations, peace talks, when power is actually divided up in society. And then, yes, you can be part of the development process, but not really the hardcore security and political issues. You're welcome, Sanam.
Thank you. So I think, why has this agenda been so difficult on this issue of participation specifically? It's because we're asking for a paradigm shift, right? We've had literally 2,500 years of war and peace diplomacy, where it's been armed actors and political actors, and it's like a football game that they come and we frame it around power, right? When I was working on the standby team with the UN, and I was in Somalia, to me, what we had to do was to flip the conversation and say, you know what, there's a famine. There's been 20 years of war. Let's talk about responsibility sharing. Let's talk about, if you want to become minister of this, or you want, a third of the seats in parliament or the cabinet, what responsibility are you going to take in terms of making sure that people have food and water and so forth? That is peace, right? That is about political leadership. And what we see over and over is that you have a tiny minority of women who will join an armed group or will be supportive of the armed actors or the political actors. A vast majority who are just trying to survive. And then another portion who become the peace actors. And over, what we see is that, we talk about the responsibility to protect at the international global level, and we think about it in terms of military terms. On the ground, it is women peace builders who are running to the problems and taking on that responsibility to protect. And so the paradigm shift we need to have is to say the peace processes that we design, that we pay for, that we invite people, the armed groups to, they need to be inclusive of the voices of the peace actors, of the ones who actually know what's going on, and hold the parties accountable. Right? If you have a peace process where you put the Taliban on equal footing with the entirety of Afghan society, you've elevated them far more than they need to be. But if you put the Taliban and you say, yes, we need to talk to you, you guys are, have some representation, and you're also violent, so we need to have you there to end the war. But we're also going to have Afghan women peacebuilders. We're going to have the Afghan youth. We're going to have the minority groups. We're going to have elected officials, etc. It becomes the representation of the society at the table where the future is being determined. And young people are critical because, honestly, right now we have old people with a history, extended history, shaping the future. Let's have the future shape the future. Let's have them be at the tables in terms of rethinking it. So that paradigm shift is really where we need to go. And it's been 20 years that I was young when I started this. I'm getting old and cranky about these things. So it really needs to be that shift. And we need delegations of women peacebuilders and representation at the table. And in our mediation team, this is the next thing, that, the Women Mediators Networks, you can have us in the delegations of the governments going forward, right? The whatever's happening in Doha or Turkey with Afghanistan, it can be the Germans, the British, not only it can be all women, it can be diverse women, right? It can be that in the delegations, you have members of the Commonwealth Network that happen to be Pakistani and speak Pashto. You can have me speaking Dari. It's the diversity of what else we bring to the table. Perspectives, language, cultural understanding, all these things. You can have the world there to help basically bring peace. That's how we have to rethink these issues, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought I would use a different topic that has been brought up in the questions from the audience here, and that is the importance of the national action plans. And there's a specific question for Siga Fatima, to what extent ECOWAS has supported the implementation of Mali's national action plan, and what achievements that might have come out of that one. But I think we can also elevate that question to a more general one. How important are these national action plans as an instrument of implementation of this agenda at this stage? Is that helping us do the work that we want to do, or is it just another round of talk rather than walk the talk, so to speak? So Siga Fatima, I'll let you go first on the more specific question of Mali.
Thank you very much. We do have our national action plans, and one of the biggest problems we've had has been funding, actually, of those national action plans. And this is one thing we need to discuss. When we talk the talk, we have to also walk the walk, because we cannot have all these national action plans. We promise all the women in the different countries going through difficulties, especially countries like Mali and Burkina Faso, and then the funding is not there to actually do the work. So what we've been doing at ECOWAS, we've been very creative. We have actually linked our GBV work with what my department works on, because we also are in charge of counter-human trafficking, child rights and protection, and mixed migration and international humanitarian law. So and social protection agenda is with us. So what we do is we use our resources together and address the issues using all our funds and coming up with programs that will include all these things that we're supposed to work on. And it's been highly successful, I think. And we need to grow it, of course. And this is the next level that we're working on. And we're insisting that the negotiations take place at the local levels, because most of the time men are brought in from even outside the country to come and do peace work and to discuss with the people who have the issues. We think, and for us at ECOWAS, what we have done in my department is actually have the two women's organizations I talked about, and they at local level, they're working with the people every day. And what we have, also an advantage we have at in the ECOWAS region, is that the majority of our population is actually 67% is 25 and under, which means that we don't have a choice. The young people are involved whether we like it or not because they're the majority. And I think this is an advantage we have. In the case of Mali, it's very complicated, but we have started new initiatives recently to help them and make sure that the women are actually in the forefront of the discussions of resolving the issues of Mali, rather than having these men come in and go in, meet for a few minutes or a few hours and go. The women are there. They're living the life of what is all the issues and problems within the society are on the shoulders of the women. So we are now focusing, making sure that the action plans are done there, especially at local level, and then feed up to national level and then to regional level. We're doing the bottom up because like Foucault says, power, it comes from below. It's not coming from above. And that's work at this point. And I'm very excited because we have wonderful youth who are determined and who are committed to the future of West Africa. And I am very hopeful.
Thank you so much. And I see, Rudina, you wanted to add something to that as well.
Yes, especially related to the national action plans, I think that are valuable tools to translate the commitment into concrete achievement. Besides the monitoring plan of the resolution recognizing achievement in women representing security forces, executive cabinet position, and other important issues, I think that we need to look beyond numbers and into the heart of WPS issues. Many women, even in high position, have limited knowledge of the resolution regulation, and even more limited understanding of how it can be adapted, the resolution to the Albanian context, which is not a direct conflict or post-conflict zone. The interaction with civil society needs to strengthen the element of capacity building in line with the monetary process. In our work or our promoting WPS agenda, She Built Peace campaign, we include many women from the parliamentarians to understand and to be active actors of change related to the resolution. So I think that we need to go to the base. We need to go to the information and have women and the youth that work for WPS agenda besides the national action plans.
Thank you. Rosemary, from the UN perspective, what do you think? How important are the national action plans at this stage?
I do think they're very important. But I do feel that they must be monitored. And just to have a national action plan and check the box is not enough. So I do think it's important that not only national governments are monitoring, but as I mentioned earlier, that the African Union does this as well. And I think it's extremely helpful for them to be tracking this and to ensuring that they are being taken seriously. If I could just go back to the previous question, there's something I wanted to raise on having more women at the table in peace processes. We toyed with the idea, and we having designated seats. And I won't name the country where we were using this, so that, for example, if you want more people, 3 extra in your delegation, they've got to be women. And if you don't produce women, well, then you don't get those seats. Now, it sounds a little draconian, perhaps, and you may ask, does it mean that these women who would come would play a meaningful role? But I think it's really an important way to get them at the table. And we know in many places, in many conflicts, we know the women in different countries, and that there are many capable women who could be at the table and play a useful role. So I think that's something to consider going forward. The other thing is we need male champions. I think we have to look at this carefully. It's one thing for me to go to a country and talk to a group of women, but if I go with, and I did this once with the former Commissioner for Peace and Security of the African Union, went to Libya together, and we met with a lot of women's groups. And we really made, we were very, very public about what we were doing and championing the need for Libyan women to be engaged in political life. and in peace processes. And I think it makes a difference. So we need to find those buddies to help us going forward.
Thank you. Anne, final thoughts on the national action plans?
Yeah, yes, I think what Rosemary said about being a thick in the book is exactly what it was a worst case scenario. That is just a death project, and we say now we have a national action plan. But it could be also in a best case scenario, guiding accountability tool for the implementation. We have had our national action plan in 2006, and it really helps. What I would suggest is that we also should have regional action plans. And actually, we are happy to see. Now it seems like it's not working. Now it seems like it's my microphone was something wrong with. I hope it works now. We have incorporated in European Union the VPS in the EU-wide gender action plan. And I would see that for OSCE also. But unfortunately, in this organization that I'm now chairing, there is no consensus on this. But to go from national action plan to also regional action plan, that would be something I think we should strive for in our respective organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The final question I want to ask you, and it's echoed by a lot of members of the audience as well, is you're all representing organizations at different levels, working hard on these issues. But what kind of specific measures or achievements do you hope to sort of erase from your to-do list over the next coming year? And I'm going to be really tough, unfortunately, and say you each have 30 seconds. And let's do it in the opposite order of speaking then. So Sanam, you go first.
Gosh, I've been trying to work myself out of a job for 20 years and it just gets worse. No. I would say two things. One is I would really like to see that we're not stuck in the conversation of, should we have, it's great to have quotas in the delegations if they want to have it, but I really want us to be thinking about at the peace table, we should have peace actors as separate delegations, as independent delegations. They are not part of the government. They are not part of the armed groups. They are representatives of the voices of society, and they deserve to be there. And they need to have their own political agenda. So that I think is one thing. I think I'll retire the day that happens. Second is funding. We set up the Innovative Peace Fund at ICAN. We delivered about $1.8 million of funding last year across over 30 countries, grants from $3,000 to $100,000. It makes a difference to have independent funding going directly to women with all of the support that comes with it, because it's solidarity, it's technical support, and so forth. But we do need to increase the independent funding that we can channel out for rapid response, for flexible, et cetera, grants to partners who are on the ground. It's investing in trust. They've already built the trust. Let's invest in the trust that they have in their communities, and let's enable them to be their own voices at the national level and regionally. So money, but independent delegations of women peace builders at peace talks, and then you won't hear much from me. I'll go and garden. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanam. Rosemary.
Sorry. Thank you. First and foremost, funding. I really would like to see some insured funding for women, peace, and security. I mentioned the 40% for the Peacebuilding Fund, but my own department in our voluntary contributions, we are spending 17%, and I do want to increase that going forward. And second, while I take the point about independent delegations, I still think we need to see more women at the table in whether it's government or opposition delegations, going forward. And that's something I would hope that every UN-led process increases that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Siga, Fatima.
Yes, thank you very much. I think also the issue still goes back to funding. The funding is limited when it comes to the women, peace, and security components of security programs. Most of the money goes into arms. They go into paying soldiers to defend the countries. And I think in terms of emergency, what is important is really getting the money where it should go, so at the local level where people can quickly change their lives, and also the fact that the women traditionally are the peacemaking people. But in this format that we have now, our women in most of West Africa have been relegated when before traditionally they were the key peace builders in the communities. I think we would also want to go back to that.
Thank you so much. We are unfortunately very quickly running out of time, but we have Rodina first and then Helga and Ann to finish this off. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. The key achievement that I hope we will have crossed off the list is the awareness raising and capacity building among key strategic social segments. Through the She Build campaigns that we have started and hope to be continued, we have seen how can we raise community awareness on the role, on the women's role and contribution to security and preservation of human rights. The same is valid for the 3025 resolution, which we are presenting and explaining to professional women and youth across the country, and we are engaging them directly to promote its objectives. Secondly, the investment in more resilient communities through promotion of tolerance and understanding is the heart of our daily community works. In all these efforts, we especially would like to emphasize the role of regional organizations, their supports to achieve a great impact in grassroots levels, in local level. Thank you.
Thank you. And Helga?
No, thank you. First, maybe two issues quickly. First, on national action plans, I agree with Anne, it would be fantastic to have an OSCE-wide, but national action plans need to be implemented. So I would hope that there is more reflection also on the part of donor countries how to incentivize implementation to set the train rolling, and that's carefully worded. And second, maybe less ambitious, but my immediate goal, I want to convene a networking event of all women mediators in the OSCE area, link it with our OSCE partners for cooperation in the Mediterranean and Asia, that includes Afghanistan, and then create an OSCE-wide women's mediators networking that can not only share best practices, but also really be effective.
Thank you so much. And finally, Anne.
I would like everybody to put their gender glasses on, men and women. The most important thing I have learned from having a feminist foreign policy, I would like everybody to put their gender glasses on, men and women, because having a feminist foreign policy has taught us that the most important thing is that you mainstream gender into all issues. You should change the structures. You should have the gender in everything, not just specific projects or specific representatives or specific numbers. In everything you should have a gender perspective. And it demands everybody to see things in a different way. So on with the gender glasses and it will be much better.
Those are excellent final words, I'd say. So I just want to turn to the audience and say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of you in the panel for fantastic perspectives. We could have gone on for at least another hour, and I hope to continue this conversation in many formats in the future. But thank you once again, and thank you all at home for also engaging with us so actively with your questions.